Hi everyone. Today video is on request logging in a web API where the API is built with mediated design pattern. Okay. So for this request logging, we are going to use implement a interface that was provided by mediator, that is nothing but iPipeline behavior. Okay. Today we are going to implement iPipeline behavior to log something in our application like request logging. Okay, so this can be helpful for to determine the time taken by the request. Those kind of scenarios, this implementation will be helpful. Okay, so what is iPipeline behavior interface? So the iPipeline behavior exactly works like ASP.NET Core middleware. Okay, so it is similarly works like a ASP.NET Core middleware, but its starting execution and ending execution happens within the mediator, iMediator. Okay, so .NET Core middleware always executes first, right? First when the request arrives, but uh, this iPipeline behavior middleware only exist when we use iMediator. Okay, then only they start executed. Unless until then they won't executed. Okay, by default like a normal .NET Core middleware. Okay, so the iMediator send method is usually used to invoke the query or command. So in mediator, the send method from the iMediator interface generally invokes the query or the command in handlers in our CQRS pattern. So if we implement iPipeline behavior, then begin logic inside of it start executes. Okay, then the query or command handler executes. Later again, pipeline executes end logic. For suppose, if I use iMediator.send method at that time, instead of directly invoking the handlers or a query, if we have implementation for iPipeline behavior, then it will start execute first starting logic of the iPipeline behavior until await next. Okay, response handler arrives. Okay, that we can understand when we write the code. Okay, at that time it will skip to another iPipeline behavior if exist. If no more iPipeline behaviors exist, then it will directly goes to query or command based on its request. After completion of the query or command with the response, it's again back to the or resumes the iPipeline behavior implementation and then executes the end logic and finally return the response to the controller, and controller returns the response to the uh, users. Okay, so this is the flow how iPipeline behavior executes. See, whenever iMediator, okay, uh, send method invoke, then what will happen? First, it start try to execute all iPipeline behaviors. If you have n iPipeline behaviors, all those n iPipeline behaviors are going to execute it. Okay, so it will initially executes the begin logic of the iPipeline behavior interface. Once that is done, it will going to next invoke the other iPipeline behavior. Similarly, it will invoke all the n number of iPipeline behavior that we implemented in our project. And finally, it's go to the query and command execution. Once that is done, along with response, it returns back to the same pipeline and executes the end logic inside of the iPipeline behavior. You can observe here. Okay. And pipeline, and finally it reaches the iMediator line where we implemented in our controller. Then controller will return the response. So in between, we can implement request log in one of our pipeline. Okay. So let's jump into implementing the iPipeline behavior. Okay. So this is my .NET 5 Web API project. What I have did means I have implemented a one sample controller using the mediator pattern. So here I am not going to writing the mediator pattern from the scratch. I am going to give you a link where I have explained in detail how to implement the mediated design pattern in Web API. So you can go go to the description and please check over there if you want to understand how to define it. If you are well known about the mediator, then you can ignore that video and you can continue watching this video. Okay, so this is the basic overview I want to show before going to creating iPipeline behavior. Okay, so this is my controller, and here are the handlers where we can write query handler or command handler. Okay, and this is the request model for my query or command handler, and this is my response model for my query or command handler. Okay, so if you are observing here, I have an endpoint like get products. Okay, and using iMediator send, I'm going to invoke. Okay, so here is the point. I have mentioned, right? Once the send method is invoked, it won't directly execute the handler if you have iPipeline behavior. Okay, first they will execute. Here only iPipeline behavior start execute. If we don't have any iPipeline behavior, it's then directly executes the handlers. Okay, so if here is my sample mediator send method invokes. Here I'm creating the instance of my request object. This one, and this is the response type, and this request object implicitly invokes this handler. Okay, so this is all. Here I am returning some dummy product response model for my demo. Okay, so for complete implementation, you can check the link I will provide in the description. Okay, for complete mediator where I have used database communication instead of this, instead of like this a dummy data. Okay, there you can understand. Okay, so let's jump into implement some pipeline behavior. So I want to implement pipeline behavior for application request logging, right? So what I will do, let's create a folder like pipelines. Okay, let's create a class. So this is my app logging behavior class. Now what we have to do means, let me stop the application. I want to do I pipeline behavior. Okay, let's import the namespace. See, this is coming from using MediatR. Okay, so MediatR, I have already installed the plugin for implementing the design pattern. Okay, here you can specify the request, comma, the response. Here also I can define like that, the request, comma, the response. Okay, now let's implement the iPipeline behavior. Okay, this is the handle method that get executed automatically when the iPipeline has been invoked. Okay, so here what I will do. So before going any further, let's add constructor and let's use iLogger. Okay, so iLogger application. I can give my class name itself, its type. Okay, and I will inject it. Let's inject this into the constructor. Okay, so this iLogger uh, is a default .NET Core provider logging system where either we can log into files or we can log into console or we can to log into database using some external libraries like Serilog. For this demo, what I will do, I will just log my request starting and ending point and time taken into the console application. Okay. in real time, you can log into database. Okay. So I will prepare few properties that I want to print in the console, like uh, request name. For that, what I can do, type of, I can say request dot name. Okay. So this is nothing but if I am executing this controller, what is the request object? Request object is this one. Get product request model. This name gets printed. Okay. And next thing, I want to create some unique ID. Okay. Let it name like request ID. I will use GUID. Okay. And next thing, I want to instantiate the timer. Okay. Like a stopwatch. Okay. Let's start the time. Okay. And here, this is my initial logic. Okay. I have mentioned a begin logic will execute it, right? So that is the logic we have just written now in the pipeline. Okay. So here what I can do, I can await it for my response. Okay, let's make it async. Okay. So what it will happen whenever this line got executed, then it will immediately shift to either if it has another IPipeline here that will get executed, or else it will directly go to the uh, handlers like this. This logic will get executed. Okay. So next I want to write the end logic. Okay. From till here begin logic. Okay. So from here end logic. Okay. Which executed after the query handlers. Okay. Now what I will do, I will stop the time. Okay. First let's log the uh, starting request when the request begins. Okay. Logger dot log information. So simply what I will do, I will log some text value. So request name. Okay. Request name and request ID. What you have here, request IDs. Okay. So same way we just log here, but end of the request we will log time elapsed as well. Okay. So what I will do, begin request and request. Okay. And I want to total type. Okay. So sw dot elapsed time in milliseconds. Okay. Something like this you can log into your database in real real-time cases. Okay, and finally we have to return the response. For that, what you have to do? Let's assign it to a variable. At the end, just return the response from the query handler. Okay, so that's it. This is how iPipeline can be used for the request logging. Okay, so what I did, I created iPipeline and I implemented iPipeline behavior that is of type request and response. Okay, and it will have handle method that's get executed every time when this send method start executed. Okay, so initially all the begin logic gets executed. Once next await dot next this response method got executed, then immediately uh, the code execution will be shifted to another iPipeline behavior if exists, or else if doesn't have any another iPipeline behavior, it will directly go to the handler, either query handler or post handler, sorry, query handler or command handler based on the request. Okay, once the response is written from this handler, what it will do? It will again comes back here. After this next line, the remaining code gets executed and finally response will be returned. Okay. So one final step we have to do means we need to register it to the startup.cs file. Okay. Services dot transient and I can type pipeline behavior. Okay. Since we will have dynamic types, right? So you simply give comma separation between the types. That is enough. And app logging behavior. Okay. Since they are generics, we should wrap them inside of the type of. Okay. And this should be circular brackets, not anchor tags. So that's how we need to register our pipeline. So let's run and check how they're logging into the console. So what I will do, I have already added debugger here, and let me add here also and here also. Let's understand how the execution process runs by debugging through our code. Let me run it. Okay, if you observe here our console, it is no information is logged till now. Okay, now let's execute our endpoint, then we can observe the console. Okay, here is my endpoint in the Swagger. Let's try to execute it. See, first it is directly arrived to the controller. It is not executed directly into the handler by default like a middleware. That means uh, for every request, API request, pipeline behavior won't execute directly. If you use IMediatR only, it will execute. Let's understand it. Now I am debugging. I am continuing my debug. See, from the controller, I came back to iPipeline behavior. Means that nothing but my iPipeline behavior. Okay, let's execute it. The handler is executing and request ID is executed, timer executed and started, and I am logging some information. Logging is done. Initial log. See here. Begin request, request name, some request ID. Right? Begin request is logged in. Okay. Now I am continuing my debug. It won't execute these lines now. Once this see directly it is coming to the handler. See these lines of code not executed. Right? Directly it is came back to the handler because await.next represent switching from this iPipeline behavior to next executable code. Since I don't have another pipeline, it is directly went to handler. Now handler will get executed. Okay, response is returning. See, again it is back to the IPipeline behavior, but it start executing after this await line. Okay, so continue debugging F10. Okay, now we have completed our end request as well. So if you go here, you can see end request name, and request ID, and here you can see total time it is taken in milliseconds. Okay, and execute it. See, I got my response, and here you can observe my time logging, like begin request and the end request. Okay, that's how we can use iPipeline for logging the request to determine the estimation, time estimation. Okay, so I hope this video on iPipeline behavior have given some good information how to implement them. So if you like my video, please do subscribe to my channel. Soon we will meet with new videos. Until then, signing off.